The sun was a hammer that did not stop beating against the anvil of the earth. Here, in the southern reaches of the Arizona Territory, the world was composed of three things: silence, heat, and sharp edges. The ground was not soil, but a crust of baked alkali and shattered stone, interspersed with the skeletal claws of mesquite and cholla cactus that seemed to crouch in wait for anything soft enough to bleed. Above, the sky was not blue but a blinding, bleached white, stripped of color by the sheer ferocity of the light. Nothing moved except the heat haze that shimmered off the hardpan, making the distant mountains look like they were melting into the horizon. High above, black specks circled in a slow, patient gyre. The vultures knew the land better than any mapmaker. They knew that in this heat, life was a temporary condition. Clara moved through this furnace like a ghost that had not yet realized it was dead. She was 25 years old, though the sun and the terror of the last 3 days had etched lines into her face that belonged to a woman of 50. Her dress, once a respectable calico meant for Sunday mornings, was now a tattered gray rag, stiff with dust and dried sweat. The hem had been shredded by thorns, hanging in strips that dragged through the dirt. She stumbled, her boot catching on a submerged root. A cry tore from her throat, dry and cracking, as she fell to her hands and knees. The earth burned her palms, but that pain was distant, a dull echo compared to the screaming agony that radiated from her hips and thighs. She stayed there on the ground, gasping for air that felt like inhaling broken glass. Her body instinctively tried to curl inward, to pull her knees together for protection, but the movement sent a jolt of white-hot lightning through her groin and down the inside of her legs. She sobbed, a single, hitching sound. She could not do it. She could not close her legs. The swelling was too great, the raw flesh too tender. She had to kneel with her knees wide apart, a posture that filled her with a sick, deep shame even here, where only the lizards and the buzzards could see her. "Get up," she told herself. "If you stay here, Harlan wins." The name brought a fresh wave of nausea. Harlan. It summoned memories she tried to push down, but the heat made her mind porous, leaking the past into the present. She remembered the parlor of her father's house in Missouri, the air thick with pipe smoke. She remembered her father telling her that Harlan was a good match, a man of means, a trader with a ranch out west who needed a wife to manage his affairs. It had been a transaction, dry and bloodless. She had been the goods, traded for the promise of stability. She remembered the long journey west, the dust coating her tongue, and the first time she saw the ranch. It was isolated, a fortress of timber and adobe miles from the nearest settlement, and she remembered how quickly the mask had slipped from Harlan's face. He did not want a partner. He wanted a possession. He wanted something he could break, just to prove he was the one holding the hammer. She forced herself to stand, swaying like a drunkard. The friction of her own skin was torture. Every step was a battle between the instinct to move and the body's demand to stop. She looked down at her feet. She had lost one shoe miles back, she thought, or perhaps days ago. She could not remember. The remaining boot was split at the seam. She began to walk again. Left foot, right foot. Do not let the thighs touch. Keep them open. The humiliation of it burned hotter than the sun. The memory of the barn rushed at her. The smell of old hay and manure. The darkness. After the baby, the little girl who never took a breath. The silence that had shattered Clara's heart. Harlan had changed. He had blamed her. He had called her weak. He had called her tainted. "You are no good to me like this," he had said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You are ruined. But I will keep you from running off and shaming me further." The iron. She could feel the cold weight of it even now, hallucinating the sensation. He had fashioned restraints from old tack and iron cuffs, brutal things meant for livestock, not human limbs. He had chained her in the barn like a mad dog. The cuffs were too small, the iron rough and rusted. They had dug into the tender flesh of her ankles and shins. But worse was the spreader bar he had rigged, a cruelty designed to limit her movement, to keep her hobbled, for weeks. She had lived in that filth. She had lost the ability to stand straight. She had lost the dignity of a human being. When the drunken hand had forgotten to lock the barn door 3 nights ago, she had not run, she had crawled. She had used a rusted file found in the dirt to worry at the pins of the shackles until her fingers bled, finally freeing herself from the heavy chain. But the cuffs and the damage they had done remained. She had run into the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back and the iron-red ring of agony around her legs. Now, the sky was beginning to change. The relentless white was bruising into a deep, sullen purple. The wind picked up, no longer just hot but heavy, carrying the smell of ozone and wet creosote. A storm was building. In this country, rain did not come as a mercy. It came as a flood, a violence of water that scoured the earth clean. Clara looked up at the gathering clouds. Thunder rumbled, a low growl that vibrated in her chest. I cannot go any further, she thought. She saw the lip of a canyon ahead, a jagged tear in the earth where the ground dropped away into shadow. If she could reach it, perhaps there would be water. Or perhaps she could just lie down in the dark and let the end come. She staggered the last 50 yards. Her vision blurred, dark spots dancing before her eyes. The world tilted. Her legs, pushed beyond all endurance, finally buckled. She fell hard, rolling into a cluster of rocks and scrub brush near the canyon's edge. The sharp stones bit into her cheek, but she did not move. Let him find a corpse, she thought, as the darkness rose up to take her. I will not go back. A mile to the east. Naichi paused. He was a shadow against the red rock, a man woven from the same harsh materials as the desert itself. He was Apache, in his early 30s, with hair that hung long and dark past his shoulders, held back by a strip of red cloth. His face was broad and angular, the skin bronzed and weathered by a life lived entirely under the open sky. He wore buckskins that had seen seasons of wear and high moccasins that made no sound when he moved. He stood perfectly still, listening. The wind was changing. The smell of rain was strong, a metallic tang on the back of his tongue. The storm would be bad. The arroyos would flood. But it was not the weather that had stopped him. It was the ground. Naichi looked down at the sand. To an untrained eye, there was nothing there but wind-blown dust. To him, it was a story written in bold ink. Someone had passed here, recently. He crouched, his fingers hovering over a disturbance in the soil. The tracks were erratic. Drag marks, stumbling, 1 foot heavier than the other. No defined heel strike. This was not a warrior, nor a hunter. This was something wounded. He felt the old, familiar weight of caution settle over him. He was alone out here, a man without a people. He had been separated from his band months ago, after the blue-coat soldiers had descended on their winter camp at dawn. He remembered the noise, the cracking of rifles, the screaming of horses. He remembered the smoke. He had been away, scouting up the ridge. By the time he returned, the village was ash. His wife, his daughter, gone. The silence that followed had been louder than the gunfire. Since then, he had drifted. He could not go to the other bands. The shame of his survival, and the rumors that he had failed to warn the camp, kept him away. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of the world, avoiding the white settlements that spread like a disease across the plains, and avoiding the Apache fires where he would have to face his own guilt. He should turn away. If this was a white settler, it was trouble. If it was a soldier, it was death. But the tracks drew him. They were pathetic, desperate scratches in the earth. There was a madness in them. He rose fluidly and began to follow the trail. He moved with a deceptive slowness, his eyes scanning the horizon, the brush, the rocks. He carried a Winchester rifle, the stock worn smooth, held loosely in one hand. The trail led him toward the rim of the box canyon. As he walked, the wind began to whip his hair across his face. The first fat drops of rain hit the dust, exploding like musket balls. He saw the bundle of gray cloth wedged between 2 boulders before he saw that it was a person. It looked like trash discarded by a wagon train. But then the wind caught a loose strip of fabric, and he saw the pale, sunburned skin of an arm. Naichi stopped 10 paces away. He raised the rifle slightly, not aiming, but ready. Is it a trap? He wondered. He waited. The figure did not move. He stepped closer, the gravel crunching softly under his moccasins. It was a woman, a white woman. Her hair was matted with dirt, the color of dried straw. She was lying face down, one arm thrown out as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Naichi looked at her legs. The dress was torn almost to the hip, revealing limbs that were swollen and discolored. He frowned. He had seen many injuries in his life. Bullet wounds, arrow strikes, burns. This was different. He crouched beside her. "Wake up," he said in the language of the white eyes. His voice was rough from disuse, deep and gravelly. The woman did not stir. He reached out and touched her shoulder. She reacted as if he had dropped a coal on her skin. She gasped, a ragged, terrified sound, and scrambled backward, her limbs flailing against the rocks. She flipped onto her back, her eyes wide and wild, staring at him with a horror that went beyond the fear of death. She tried to scramble away, crab-walking backward, but her legs refused to cooperate. She let out a low whimper, her face twisting in agony as she tried to pull her knees together, to shield herself, but they would not close. They stayed apart, trembling violently. Naichi stayed low, his hands open, showing her he held no weapon now. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the fever. She was burning up. "No," she whispered. Her voice was a dry husk. "Please, no more." Naichi looked at the sky. The clouds had opened. The rain was falling hard now, a cold curtain sweeping across the desert. If he left her here, the cold and the wet would finish what the sun had started. She would be dead by morning. He looked back at her. She was defenseless. She was broken, and in her eyes, he saw a reflection of the same hollow despair he carried in his own chest. He made a decision. It went against every instinct of self-preservation he possessed. "I take you," he said. "Not far. Dry place." She shook her head, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "No," she sobbed. "Don't touch me." He did not have the words to reassure her, and he did not have the time to argue. The temperature was dropping rapidly. He moved forward. She struck out at him, weak, fluttery blows that landed harmlessly on his chest. He caught her wrists gently but firmly. "Quiet," he said. He slipped one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees. As he lifted her, she screamed, a raw, tearing sound that was lost in a clap of thunder. He felt her body seize, rigid with pain. He realized with a jolt that simply being held was causing her agony. He adjusted his grip, trying to bear her weight without pressing on her bruised thighs. But she was limp now, having fainted from the pain. He carried her. She was light, too light, starved. He moved quickly along the canyon rim, finding the narrow, hidden trail that led down into the deep rock. He knew this place. He had a camp here, tucked into a deep undercut in the sandstone wall, protected from the wind and the rain, invisible from the rim above. The rain turned the dust to slick mud. Naichi moved with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, balancing the woman's weight against the treacherous path. He could feel the heat radiating from her body, soaking into his buckskins. He reached the alcove. It was a shallow cave, dry and floored with soft sand. He knelt and lowered her carefully, trying to place her so her legs could remain in the position they seemed to want, spread and bent slightly. She moaned, but did not wake. Naichi moved efficiently. The storm was raging now, a waterfall of noise outside the cave. But inside, it was quiet. He gathered the dry wood he kept stacked in the corner, dead mesquite and ironwood. He built a small fire in the circle of stones. He was careful to keep it small, smokeless. He did not want to signal his presence to the world, even in a storm. The flames licked up, casting dancing orange shadows against the red rock walls. The warmth began to fill the small space. He took his canteen, uncorking it. He needed to get water into her. He lifted her head, tilting the canteen to her cracked lips. She sputtered, coughing, then swallowed greedily. Her eyes fluttered open. She was not lucid. Her gaze wandered around the cave, fixing on the fire, then on him. She did not scream this time. She seemed too exhausted for fear. Naichi set the canteen down. He looked at her legs. The dress was a ruin, soaked with mud and rain, the fabric stiff with old blood and pus where it had stuck to her wounds. It needed to come off. The infection was smelling sweet and rot-like in the damp air. He pulled a knife from the sheath at his belt. The blade was obsidian, chipped to a razor edge, with a handle of wrapped leather. The woman saw the knife. Her breath hitched. She tried to push herself up on her elbows. "No," she whispered. "What are you doing?" "Medicine," Naichi said. "Need to see." He reached for the hem of the dress. She thrashed, a weak, convulsive movement. "I can't," she cried out, the shame breaking through her delirium. "I can't close my legs. It hurts." She was confessing it like a sin, as if the inability to be modest was a crime she had committed. Naichi paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He spoke slowly, emphasizing each word. "I do not hurt you." He moved the knife with surgical precision. He did not ask her to undress. He knew she could not handle the movement. Instead, he slit the heavy, wet fabric of the skirt, cutting it away from her hips, peeling it back like the skin of a fruit. The cloth fell away. Naichi stopped. He had seen men torn apart by bear claws. He had seen the aftermath of cannon fire, but what he saw now made his stomach turn over. The woman's legs were a map of torture. Around her ankles, the skin was gone. In its place were deep, ulcerated trenches where iron cuffs had eaten into the meat and bone. The wounds were angry red, oozing yellow fluid, the edges black with necrosis. But it was not just the ankles. Higher up, on her thighs and shins, were raw, weeping abrasions. The skin had been rubbed away in wide patches. He realized what he was looking at. She had been shackled, restrained. And the restraints had been rigged to keep her legs spread, to force her into a position of total vulnerability and immobility. The muscles of her inner thighs were spasming, swollen tight as drums. The iron bar, for there must have been a bar to cause this specific pattern of injury, had chafed her raw every time she tried to move, every time she tried to sleep. She had been treated worse than a mule, worse than a dog. Clara lay back, her arm thrown over her eyes to hide her face. Her chest heaved with silent sobs. She was exposed, her deepest shame laid bare in the firelight before a stranger, a man her people called a savage. Naichi stared at the wounds. The firelight flickered, illuminating the gruesome depth of the gouges. Unbelievable. No man with a soul could do this. It took a special kind of demon to devise a way to make a woman's own body a source of constant, burning torture, to take the softness of a wife and bind it in cold iron until it rotted. He looked at the imprint of the shackles, the ghost of the metal still visible in the crushed flesh. Naichi's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. His hand gripped the handle of his knife so hard his knuckles turned white. For 3 years, since the death of his family, he had felt nothing but a cold, gray ash in his heart. He had thought himself incapable of feeling anything for another human being. He had thought his capacity for caring had burned down with his village. But as he looked at this broken, terrified woman who believed she was monstrous because she could not close her legs, the ash sparked. A hot, fierce heat flooded his chest. It was not the heat of the desert. It was the heat of rage. He looked from her wounds to her face. She was peeking at him from under her arm, waiting for his disgust, waiting for him to leave her, or to finish her off. Naichi sheathed his knife with a sharp snap. He stood up and walked to the small pile of supplies he kept against the wall. He grabbed a clean cloth and a pouch of dried sage and yarrow. He returned to the fire and knelt beside her. His face was set in stone, hard and unyielding, but his hands, as he reached out to clean the first wound, were as gentle as falling rain. He would not let her die. Not this one. The desert could take the weak, and the soldiers could take the strong. But this woman, he would stand between her and the dark. "Close your eyes," Naichi said softly. Clara lowered her arm. She looked at him, confused by the lack of cruelty in his voice. She obeyed, her eyelids fluttering shut. Tears leaking from the corners, Naichi dipped the cloth in water and began to wash the blood from the iron marks. Outside, The storm raged, hammering against the stone, but inside the alcove, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the steady, ragged breathing of two people who had nothing left to lose. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world scoured and raw. When the light finally crested the canyon rim, it did not come gently. It spilled over the red stone walls like spilled milk, cold and pale and unforgiving. The canyon, which had been a pit of black terror during the night, revealed itself as a wound in the earth, jagged and ancient. The walls were sheer curtains of sandstone, streaked with oxidized iron and minerals that looked like dried blood. Down on the canyon floor, the runoff from the storm had turned the dry wash into a ribbon of churning, chocolate-colored mud. It carved through the silence, gurgling over stones. Every living thing that had hunkered down against the violence of the rain was now emerging. A lizard, sluggish with cold, flattened itself on a rock to catch the first heat. The cacti, cholla with their deceptively soft-looking needles and prickly pear with their broad, flat paddles, seemed to glisten, their spines washed clean of dust, standing like sentinels crowned in thorns. Clara woke to the smell of wet sage and wood smoke. For a moment, in the haze between sleep and waking, she thought she was back in the barn. She expected the smell of moldy hay and the heavy, metallic clanking of the chain. She braced herself for the rough grasp of Harlan's hand, the way he would shake her shoulder to wake her for the morning feeding, treating her with less tenderness than he showed his prize mare. But the air was fresh, sharp with the scent of pine drifting down from the high rim. She opened her eyes. Above her was not the rotting timber of a barn roof, but the massive, overarching curve of stone. The alcove where she lay was dry, a pocket of silence carved by wind and water over 1,000 years. She tried to sit up. The movement was a mistake. As her hips shifted, a line of fire shot from her ankles to her groin. It was a white-hot, tearing sensation that stole the breath from her lungs. She gasped, a sharp, ragged sound that echoed off the stone. Her legs, which had stiffened in the cold damp of the night, refused to obey her. The muscles in her inner thighs, locked tight from weeks of forced spreading and the trauma of the escape, seized up in a cramp that made her cry out. "Stay," a voice said. It was a deep voice, rough like gravel grinding together, but quiet. Clara froze. The memory of the previous night rushed back. The storm, the collapse, the Apache man who had carried her. She turned her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Naichi was there. He was crouching by the small fire, his back to the opening of the alcove. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. There was no wasted energy in him. He was feeding small twigs into the smokeless flames, coaxing heat from the damp wood. Beside him sat a battered tin cup and a pile of green vegetation he must have gathered at first light. He turned to look at her. His face was unreadable, a mask of copper skin and high cheekbones, but his eyes were dark and alert. He did not look like the monsters Harlan had warned her about, the savages who scalped women and burned homesteads for sport. He looked tired. He looked like a man who carried a heavy weight that had nothing to do with the supplies on his back. "You hurt," he stated. It was not a question. Clara swallowed, her throat dry as parchment. Yes." She tried to pull her legs together, an instinctive reaction to his gaze. The pain flared again, sickening and deep. She winced, tears pricking her eyes, and her knees fell back outward, unable to close. The shame of it washed over her, hotter than the fever. She was exposed, sprawled like a broken doll. Naichi stood up. He moved to her side, not looming over her, but kneeling down so they were at eye level. He reached out a hand. Clara flinched, shrinking back against the rock wall. Harlan had hands that grabbed. Harlan had hands that struck. Naichi paused. He held his hand suspended in the air, palm open, showing her the calluses, the dirt in the lifelines, the absence of a weapon. "No hurt," he said again. "Water." He lifted the tin cup to her lips. The smell of willow bark and something bitter rose from the steam. Clara hesitated, then drank. The liquid was hot and tasted of earth and medicine, but it soothed the raw scratchiness of her throat. Naichi set the cup down. He gestured to her legs, which were covered by the tattered remains of her petticoats and the blanket he had thrown over her. "Must look," he said. "Clean." Clara shook her head, her face burning. "I cannot. It is not right." Naichi did not look away. He pointed to his own ankle, then to hers. "Poison comes," he said, struggling with the words. "Red lines. Sickness. If poison stays, leg goes, or you die." The blunt truth of it silenced her. She knew what gangrene looked like. She had seen it on a ranch hand who had crushed his foot. The blackening skin, the sweet, rotting smell, the saw. She closed her eyes and nodded. A tiny, defeated movement. "Do what you must." Naichi peeled back the blanket. The morning light was cruel to her injuries. The raw rings around her ankles were angry and swollen, the flesh puckered and weeping yellow fluid. But it was the inner thighs that drew Naichi's focus. The chafing from the spreader bar Harlan had rigged, an invention of pure malice, had stripped the skin away in long, infected patches. The muscles were knotted, traumatized into a permanent state of tension. Naichi's face remained stoic, but Clara saw a flicker of something in his jaw, a tightening, a grinding of teeth. He took a handful of the green mash he had prepared, crushed globe mallow and sage, and began to pack it gently against the worst of the wounds. The coolness of the poultice was a shock, followed by a dull stinging. Clara gripped a handful of sand, her knuckles white. "Who did this?" Naichi asked. He did not look at her face. He focused entirely on his work, his fingers surprisingly gentle as he wrapped a strip of clean cloth around her ankle. Clara stared at the ceiling of the alcove. It was hard to speak the name. It felt like summoning a demon. "My husband," she whispered. Naichi paused, his hand stilled on the bandage. "Husband," he repeated. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "Wrong. Husband keeps, protects. This is enemy. He is both," Clara said, her voice cracking. She told him then she did not mean to. She intended to keep her silence, to protect the shreds of her dignity. But the fever, the pain, and the strange, quiet presence of this man loosened something in her chest. The words fell out like stones. She told him about coming west 3 years ago. She had been 22, full of romantic notions about the frontier. She had imagined wide vistas and a strong, silent man who would love her. Her father had arranged the marriage to Harlan, a man 20 years her senior, wealthy from trading cattle and land. I thought I could make a home," she said, her English shaking. "I thought if I was soft, the land would soften too." She told him about the isolation. The ranch was a fortress. Harlan did not want a wife. He wanted an audience for his greatness and a servant for his needs. He hated her softness. He mocked her when she cried. And then, the baby. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper, so low Naichi had to lean in to hear her over the crackle of the fire. "I was with child, a little girl. I felt her move. She was strong, but the labor, it went on too long. 3 days. Harlan would not send for a doctor. He said women had been birthing in fields since Eve, and I was just lazy." She choked back a sob. "When she finally came, she was silent. She never cried, and something inside me tore. I bled for weeks. My hips, they never went back right. Walking hurt, lying down hurt." Naichi listened. He continued to bind her wounds, but his movements had slowed. He was absorbing the weight of her words. "Harlan said I killed her," Clara said, the tears finally spilling over, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "He said my body was poison. He said I was broken stock. He stopped, touching me, for a year. And then, when he decided he wanted to try for a son, I could not be a wife to him. The pain was too much. I refused him." She looked at Naichi, her eyes pleading for understanding. "That was when he chained me. He said if I was going to be a useless animal, he would treat me like one. He put the iron on me to keep me from running, and the bar to keep me open, so he wouldn't have to fight me." Naichi finished tying the last knot. He sat back on his heels. The silence in the cave was heavy, thick with the horror of her confession. He looked at her, and for the first time, Clara saw the anger he was holding back. It was not the explosive, shouting rage of Harlan. It was a cold, deep thing, like the water at the bottom of a well. "He is not a man," Nietzsche said. "He is a sick dog. A sick dog must be put down." He stood up and walked to the edge of the alcove, staring out at the rain-washed canyon. His back was stiff. "I know this loss," he said, his voice flat. Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. "You?" Nietzsche did not turn around. "I had a wife, Sunse Ore, Morning Star, and a daughter, little one. She had 4 winters." He gestured vaguely to the north, toward the mountains that were currently hidden by clouds. "We were camped at the place of Bitter Springs. The soldiers came at first light. I was not there. I was scouting for elk, high on the ridge." He paused. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "I heard the guns. The Springfield rifles. I ran back, but the smoke, it was already in the sky. When I got there, the lodges were burning. The soldiers had ridden through. They did not stop to fight warriors. They shot at the tents." He turned slowly to face her. His eyes were haunted, looking through her, seeing ghosts. "I found them in the ashes. My wife, my girl." He tapped his chest, over his heart. "I should have been there. My people. Some say I ran. Some say I was a coward who let the bluecoats find us. I did not run, but I did not die with them. That is my shame. I live, and they are smoke." Clara looked at him. The divide between them, white and Apache, civilized and savage, seemed to dissolve in the face of their shared graveyard. They were both parents of dead children. They were both survivors who wished, perhaps, that they hadn't survived. "I am sorry," Clara whispered. Nietzsche nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. Then he turned back to the fire. "Rest now. We eat soon." The days that followed fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the pain. The canyon became a world unto itself. To the east and west, the sheer walls cut off the horizon, limiting their universe to a strip of sky and the red earth below. It was a prison, but it was also a fortress. Nietzsche was a relentless nurse. He did not pity her, which Clara was grateful for. Pity would have broken her. Instead, he treated her recovery as a task that required focus and discipline. Every morning and every evening, he cleaned the wounds. He boiled water in a small tin pot, dissolving salts and herbs he gathered from the canyon floor. He made her move, legs straight. He would command, tapping her knee. "It hurts." Clara would gasp. "Straight," he would insist. "Muscle gets short. If muscle gets short, you never walk right. Push." He would take her heel in his hand and gently, agonizingly, press her leg toward extension. He was careful never to force it to the point of damage, but he pushed her to the edge of her tolerance. Clara would bite her lip until it bled, sweat beading on her forehead. But she pushed back. She wanted to walk. She wanted to run. In the midday heat, when the sun turned the canyon into a furnace, they rested in the shade of the alcove. Clara, unable to sit idle, asked for work. Nietzsche gave her his tunic, which had a tear in the shoulder. With clumsy, shaking fingers, she used a bone needle and sinew thread he provided to mend the garment. It was crude work compared to the embroidery she had once done in Missouri, but it felt good to make something whole again. They ate simple food. Nietzsche was a skilled hunter, but he dared not fire his rifle for fear of the sound carrying. He set snares for rabbits and lizards. He gathered piñon nuts and roasted the hearts of agave. It was meager fare, but Clara felt her strength returning. The hollows in her cheeks began to fill, just slightly. The landscape, which had seemed so hostile at first, began to reveal its beauty to her. After the storm, the desert bloomed with a desperate, frantic energy. Along the muddy banks of the wash, wildflowers burst open, gold poppies, purple lupine, and the bright red bells of penstemon. They were small, stubborn things, rooting in rock and sand, determined to live for the brief time the water lasted. Clara watched them from the alcove. They reminded her of Naichi, hard, resilient. One afternoon, as she watched Naichi sharpening his knife on a whetstone, a thought solidified in her mind. It had been forming for days, rising out of the fog of her trauma. She was angry. For 3 years, she had been drowning in shame. She had believed Harlan's lies, that she was tainted, that her body was a failure, that she deserved the chains. But looking at Naichi, listening to the silence of the canyon, the shame began to evaporate, leaving behind a hard, hot core of rage. Harlan had done this. He had taken her life. He had killed her child with his neglect, and he was still out there, breathing the air, sleeping in a soft bed, while she cowered in a cave. "I will not go back," she said aloud. Naichi looked up from his knife. "No," he said, "you go back, you die." "I don't just mean I won't go back to the ranch," Clara said, her voice stronger than it had been. "I mean, I won't go back to being that woman, the one who let him." Naichi studied her. He saw the change. The frightened rabbit was gone. In its place was something sharper, something that might survive. "Good," he said. "Anger is better than fear. Anger keeps you warm." But the canyon was not always warm. The desert was a land of extremes. As brutal as the sun was by day, the nights were stripped of heat the moment the light failed. The temperature plummeted. The rock, which held the heat for a few hours, eventually turned cold, radiating a chill that seeped into the bone. One night, a week after he had found her, the wind turned vicious. It howled down the canyon corridor, a banshee scream that rattled the brush and sent sand skittering across the floor of the alcove. They had only 2 blankets. One was the tattered wool thing Clara had wrapped herself in. The other was a buffalo hide Naichi used. Clara lay shivering, curled as tight as her legs would allow. The cold was a physical weight. Her teeth chattered, a rhythmic clicking she couldn't stop. Naichi was lying on the other side of the fire, which had burned down to embers. He lay still, staring at the smoke-stained ceiling. He heard her shivering. He heard the ragged intake of her breath. Without a word, he sat up. He picked up his buffalo robe. It was heavy, cured with the hair on, warm and smelling of earth and animal musk. He moved to where Clara lay. She flinched instinctively as his shadow fell over her, but she did not pull away. Naichi lay down beside her. He did not touch her. Not at first. He simply spread the large hide over both of them, creating a cocoon against the wind. Clara stopped breathing for a moment. He was close, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was shocking. For so long, the proximity of a man had meant pain. It had meant the heavy, suffocating weight of Harlan, or the sharp agony of the iron. But this heat was just heat. It was life. Naichi shifted, settling into the sand. He lay on his back, his arms at his sides, careful not to encroach on her space. Clara lay rigid, her heart pounding. But the warmth began to penetrate the cold that had settled in her marrow. The buffalo robe was heavy and comforting. The wind outside tore at the world. But under the hide, it was still, slowly, inch by inch. She relaxed. Her shivering subsided. She turned her head slightly. In the dim glow of the dying embers, she could see his profile, the strong nose, the set of his jaw. He was staring up, his eyes open. "Naichi?" she whispered. "Sleep," he said softly. He did not move away. Clara hesitated. Then, driven by a need she couldn't name, a need for something human, something that wasn't stone or iron, she shifted. She slid a few inches closer. Her shoulder brushed against his arm. The contact was electric. It was just a touch, cotton against buckskin, but it sent a jolt through her. She waited for him to pull away. She waited for him to strike her. He did neither. He stayed exactly where he was, a solid, warm wall against the dark. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing. It was slow and steady. She matched her breath to his. In, out, in, out. She realized then that he was awake, just as she was. He was aware of every inch of space between them. He was aware of her shoulder against his arm. And for the first time in years, Clara fell asleep not out of exhaustion, but out of peace. The morning brought a strange, fragile tension. When Clara woke, Naichi was already up, tending to the snares near the stream. She sat up, the buffalo robe sliding off her shoulders. She felt a phantom warmth where he had been. When he returned, carrying a brace of dead rabbits, she couldn't meet his eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice stiff, for the warmth." Naichi hung the rabbits on a branch. "Cold night," he said simply. "No need to freeze." He looked at her then, and his gaze lingered. It wasn't the clinical look of a healer examining a wound. It was searching. It traveled from her face to her hands, then to the curve of her shoulder where they had touched. Clara felt a flush rise in her cheeks. It was not shame. It was something else, a fluttering in her stomach that she hadn't felt since she was a girl in Missouri, watching the boys ride past the church. That evening, Naichi decided it was time to test her strength. "Walk," he said. "Not just stand. Walk." He helped her up. Clara gritted her teeth against the stiffness in her hips. She stood, swaying. The pain was there, a dull throb, but the sharp, tearing agony was duller now. The scabs were forming, the skin was knitting. She took a step. Her knee buckled. She pitched forward, a cry escaping her lips. Naichi was there. He caught her before she hit the sand. His arm went around her waist, strong and sure. Her hands flew up and clutched his biceps to steady herself. She was pressed against him, her chest heaving with exertion. She could smell him, sage, wood smoke, and the clean scent of rain-washed skin. She looked up. His face was inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She could feel the tension in his arm, the hardness of his muscle under the buckskin. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with the same electricity as the storm. Clara felt a sudden, terrifying urge to lean in, to rest her head against his chest, to let him hold her, not because she was falling, but because she wanted to be held. Naichi swallowed. His throat moved. "You are stronger," he said, his voice husky. He gently set her back on her feet, but he did not immediately let go of her waist. His hand lingered, his thumb brushing the fabric of her dress. Then he stepped back, breaking the connection. "Good," he said, turning away quickly to check the fire. "Good." Clara stood there, trembling, her skin burning where he had touched her. The sanctuary shattered 2 days later. Naichi had gone up to the rim at dawn, as he always did, to scan the horizon. He was gone longer than usual. When he returned, the stillness was gone from his face. His mouth was a grim line. He moved quickly, kicking dirt over the fire, smothering the coals. "What is it?" Clara asked, rising from where she had been grinding mesquite beans. "Riders," Naichi said. He began to pack their few belongings, the tin cup, the buffalo robe, the water skins. His movements were sharp, urgent. "How far?" Clara asked, fear cold in her stomach. 2 hours, maybe less. Who are they?" Naichi looked at her. He stopped packing for a second. "White men, 5 of them, and 2 blue coats, soldiers. Harlan." Clara breathed. Naichi nodded. They found where I carried you. They found the shoe you lost." He slung the pack over his shoulder and picked up his rifle. He looked at the canyon walls, then at Clara. "They hunt a runaway wife," he said grimly. "And they hunt a renegade Apache. If they find us here, in this hole, there is no way out." He held out his hand to her. "We must go, now." Clara looked at the small alcove that had been her home, her hospital, and her church for the last week. It was the first place she had felt safe in years. And now, the world was coming to tear it down. She took Naichi's hand. It was rough and warm. "Where?" she asked. Naichi looked toward the north, toward the high peaks where the snow never fully melted. "Up," he said, "into the sky, before the devil catches us." The decision to leave the canyon was not made lightly. It was a choice between the slow, certain death of exposure or the sharp, immediate danger of discovery. Naichi knew the land. But he also knew the men who hunted it. They were persistent, driven by a mixture of greed and a twisted sense of moral outrage. He stood by the small fire as the last of the embers died, outlining the plan to Clara. His voice was low, competing only with the wind that hissed through the creosote bushes. "We go north," he said, pointing toward the jagged blue line of the mountains that rimmed the horizon. "There is a town, San Cristobal. Small place. There is a mission there, a priest who does not ask questions, and a doctor who drinks too much whiskey but has steady hands." Clara sat on the buffalo robe, her knees drawn up slightly, though the position still caused a dull ache in her hips. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "A town?" she asked, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Naichi, they will kill you, and they will look at me." She trailed off, her hand going to her throat. She knew how they would look at her, the ruined woman, the whore who ran with an Apache. Naichi shook his head. "We do not go to the main street. We go to the edge. The doctor lives apart. He will help. You need medicine I cannot make. The poison in your blood. It sleeps, but it is not gone. You need iron for your blood and clean knives for the scars." He did not tell her the other reason. He did not tell her that he had seen the dust of 5 riders moving in a grid pattern to the south, sweeping the desert floor like a broom. He did not tell her that the canyon, once a sanctuary, was fast becoming a trap. "I have a horse," he said, "hidden in the high box canyon. She is small, but she has a heart of iron. You ride, I walk," Clara protested, looking at his moccasins, which were worn thin at the soles. "You cannot walk that far. It must be 50 miles. Naichi allowed a faint, grim smile to touch his lips. "I can walk until the mountains fall down." "Clara, it is what I do." They broke camp in the gray light of false dawn. The air was cold, biting at their exposed skin. Naichi moved with a frantic efficiency, erasing every sign of their presence. He swept the sand where they had slept with a branch of sagebrush, scattering the ashes of their fire into the wind. When they left, the alcove looked as if it had been empty for 1,000 years. He led her up a steep, twisting game trail to a higher shelf of rock where he had picketed the horse. The mare was a Mustang, a grulla with zebra stripes on her legs and a wild, intelligent eye. She snorted when she smelled Clara, backing away until Naichi placed a hand on her neck and breathed into her nostrils. "She is called Gray Wind," he said. "She knows the rocks." Getting Clara into the saddle was a trial of agony. There was no side saddle. It was a rough Mexican tree saddle Naichi had salvaged years ago. As she swung her leg over, the movement stretched the healing skin of her inner thighs. Clara cried out, biting her knuckle to stifle the sound, her face draining of color. Naichi froze, his hands hovering on her waist. "Stop?" he asked. "No," Clara gasped, tears leaking from her squeezed-shut eyes. "No, we go." They moved out as the sun breached the horizon, turning the desert into a landscape of fire and shadow. The journey was a study in endurance. The terrain shifted as they moved north, rising out of the baked alkali flats into the broken foothills. The heat was less oppressive here, but the ground was treacherous, loose shale, steep ravines filled with jumping cholla, and slick rock faces that angled sharply into deep drops. Naichi walked ahead, leading the mare by a hackamore of braided horsehair. He moved with a fluid, loping stride that ate up the miles. He did not look back often, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines, the brush, the sky. He was reading the world, the flight of a hawk, the scutter of a lizard, the way the wind bent the grass. For Clara, every step the horse took was a fresh punishment. The saddle rubbed against the scars where the iron had been. The rhythm of the gait jarred her hips, sending spikes of pain deep into her pelvis. She gripped the pommel until her fingers cramped, sweating not from heat but from the sheer effort of not screaming. By midday, the landscape began to change again. The cactus gave way to scrub oak and juniper. The air grew thinner, sharper, smelling of pine resin and dry dust. They were climbing. Naichi stopped in the shade of a twisted juniper tree. He looked up at Clara. Her face was gray, covered in a sheen of cold sweat. She was swaying in the saddle. "Down," he commanded softly. He reached up and lifted her down. Her legs collapsed the moment they touched the ground. He caught her, lowering her onto a patch of dry grass. "We rest," he said. He watered the horse from his canteen, pouring the precious liquid into his cupped hat, then offered the canteen to Clara. She drank, her hands shaking so badly she spilled water down her chin. Naichi knelt at her feet. Without asking, he lifted the hem of her tattered dress. The bandages he had applied were stained with fresh blood and yellow fluid. The riding had reopened some of the scabs. "I am sorry," Clara whispered, shame coloring her voice. "I am slowing you down. You should leave me. You could move faster alone." Naichi ignored her. He untied the laces of her boot, the one that remained, and peeled it off. He began to massage her foot, his thumbs working deep into the arch, pressing out the stiffness. His hands were rough, calloused from years of war and survival, but his touch was incredibly precise. He worked his way up to her calf, kneading the tight muscles. Clara leaned her head back against the tree trunk, closing her eyes. The pain was receding, replaced by a strange, heavy warmth where his hands moved. It was intimate in a way that terrified her. Harlan had never touched her feet. He had never touched her with the intent to heal. His hands had always been taking, demanding. Naichi's hands were giving. He moved to her other leg, his fingers tracing the line of the shin bone, avoiding the raw sores but working the muscle around them. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why do you do this?" Naichi did not stop kneading her calf. "Because you cannot walk," he said simply. "And the horse needs you to be light. If you are stiff with pain, you ride heavy." It was a practical answer, a soldier's answer. But as he worked, his thumb brushed the sensitive skin just below her knee, and his hand lingered there for a beat longer than necessary. He looked up, and for a second, the mask slipped. His eyes were dark pools of exhaustion and something else, a fierce, quiet dedication. "We survive," he said, "both of us." They rode until the light failed, camping in a narrow ravine with steep granite walls that blocked out the wind. They did not light a fire. Naichi feared the smoke would be seen against the darkening sky. They ate dried meat and hardtack biscuits, washing it down with tepid water. The night was vast. Above the rim of the ravine, the sky was a field of diamonds, the Milky Way a bruised purple smear across the heavens. The silence was absolute, save for the cropping sound of the maras eating grass nearby. They sat side by side against a boulder, wrapped in the buffalo robe. The cold of the high desert settled around them, but under the heavy fur, there was a pocket of warmth. Clara watched the stars. They seemed closer here, sharp enough to cut. "Naichi," she said into the dark. "Who were you, before?" Naichi was silent for a long time. She thought perhaps he would not answer. He was a man who hoarded his words like water. "I was a man who wanted simple things," he said finally. His voice was low, rumbling in his chest. She could feel the vibration of it against her shoulder. "My father was a warrior, a great raider. He wanted me to be like the hawk, but I like the earth." He shifted slightly, staring into the blackness. "I had a dream," he continued. "Not a vision given by the spirits, just a thought. There is a valley near the Verde River, good soil, deep. I wanted to plant corn. I wanted to raise horses, not for war, for riding, for speed." He made a gesture with his hand, shaping the air. "I wanted a house with walls of adobe, thick to keep out the heat, and trees, cottonwoods. They sing when the wind blows. I wanted to sit under those trees and watch my children run. I wanted to grow old with my wife, watching the corn grow tall." He let out a breath, a sound like a weary sigh. "It was a foolish dream. The Apache are not farmers, and the white eyes, they do not want us to have valleys. They want us in the dust." Clara turned her head to look at him. In the starlight, his profile was etched in silver. He looked noble and incredibly sad. "It was not a foolish dream," she said fiercely. "It was a good dream." Naichi looked at her. "And you? What did you want, before the trader bought you?" Clara pulled the robe tighter around her throat. "I wanted to belong," she said. "I didn't care about a big house or silk dresses. I just wanted A place where I wasn't wrong. She looked down at her hands, which were cracked and stained with dirt. My whole life, people have told me I was too soft, or too loud, or too weak. And then Harlan told me I was broken. He looked at my body like it was a tool that had snapped in his hand. Useless. Her voice trembled, brittle as dry glass. I want to be in a place where no one looks at me and sees a tragedy. I want to be touched. The admission hung in the air between them. Naichi went very still. I want to be touched, she repeated. A whisper, but with kindness. Just kindness. I want to know what it feels like to have a hand on me that doesn't want to hurt me or own me. Naichi did not speak. He did not move to touch her. But the quality of his silence changed. It was no longer the silence of a sentry. It was the silence of a man listening to a prayer. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto hers in the darkness. There was a heat in his gaze, a weight of unspoken desire that felt heavier than the buffalo robe. He understood. He knew what it was to be looked at as a thing, a savage, a threat, a target. He knew what it was to be reduced to meat and bone. I see you, he said quietly. You are not broken. Clara, you are iron that has been through the fire. You are stronger than the hammer. The words settled into her heart, filling the cracks Harlan had left behind. The peace of the night was shattered at noon the next day. They were crossing a high ridge, a spine of rock that offered a view of the sprawling basin below. The terrain was difficult, loose scree that slid under the mare's hooves, sending cascades of stone rattling down the slope. Naichi suddenly stopped. He dropped to a crouch, pulling the mare's head down. Down, he hissed. Clara slid from the saddle, ignoring the flare of pain in her legs. She crawled to where Naichi lay peering over the lip of the ridge. Below them, perhaps a mile away on the lower switchbacks, was a cloud of dust. Out of the dust emerged riders. Naichi squinted against the glare. 5 men. They were riding hard, their horses lathered. He pulled a small brass spyglass from his pouch, a prize from some long-ago raid, and extended it. He watched for a moment, then handed it to Clara. Look, he said, the man on the gray horse. Clara raised the glass. Her hands shook, making the image jump. She steadied it on a rock. The magnification brought the riders into terrifying focus. She gasped. The man on the gray horse was not Harlan. It was Silas, Harlan's foreman. A man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that held no light. He wore a long duster coat and carried a repeater rifle across his saddle. He is tracking, Clara said, her voice hollow. He is following the sign we left at the waterhole. Naichi took the glass back. He is good. Better than I thought. Suddenly, one of the other riders, a man in a checked shirt, pointed up toward the ridge. The sun had glinted off the brass of the spyglass. A shout drifted up on the wind, a thin, high sound. There, Naichi cursed in his own tongue, a harsh, guttural sound. He grabbed the mare's reins and hauled Clara to her feet. Ride, he shouted. They have seen us. Clara scrambled into the saddle. Naichi slapped the mare's flank, and the horse surged forward. They could not go back down the way they came. Their only choice was to cross the exposed ridge and try to reach the labyrinth of boulders on the other side. The pursuit began. It was a nightmare of noise and motion. From below, the crack of rifles echoed like whip cracks. A bullet whined off a rock 3 feet to Clara's left, sending stone chips flying. Naichi ran. He did not pace himself now. He sprinted alongside the horse, his chest heaving, his hand gripping the stirrup leather to keep pace. Faster, he yelled. Make her run! Clara kicked the mare. The horse scrambled over the loose rock, sliding, recovering, her hooves striking sparks from the granite. The terrain was treacherous, a broken spine of the earth that dropped away into sheer cliffs on either side. Another shot rang out, ideally. The range was too great for accuracy, but the riders below were firing volleys, filling the air with lead. They reached the crest of the ridge and plunged down into a field of massive boulders, remnants of an ancient landslide. It was a maze of stone. This way, Naichi commanded. He led the horse into a narrow fissure between two house-sized rocks. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for the mare's barrel. The walls rose up 50 feet on either side, blocking out the sun. Naichi pulled the horse to a halt deep in the shadows. He signaled Clara to be silent, placing a finger to his lips. They stood there, freezing in the sudden shade. The horse was blowing hard, her sides heaving. Naichi reached up and clamped his hand over the mare's nostrils to dampen the sound of her breathing. Clara slid down, her legs giving way. She collapsed against Naichi, clutching the front of his buckskin shirt. "Listen," he whispered. The sound of hooves on stone clattered from somewhere nearby. The posse had reached the rocks. "I see tracks," a voice shouted. It sounded close, terrifyingly close. Silas's voice, gravelly and mean. "They went into the rocks. Fan out. Watch for the savage. He'll be waiting to ambush." Naichi pressed Clara back against the stone wall. He stood in front of her, his body a shield. He held his knife in one hand, the Winchester in the other. He was coiled like a spring, ready to kill or die in the space of a heartbeat. Clara pressed her face into his back. She could smell the sour scent of his fierce sweat, mixed with the dust of the trail. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. "We're going to die," she thought. "They will find us, and they will hang him, and they will drag me back." A horse snorted just outside the fissure. "I don't see nothing." "Silas," another voice said. "The ground is too hard. No tracks here. Keep looking, damn you." Silas roared. "The bitch can't ride fast. She's hurt. They're here somewhere. Check that draw to the east." The sound of hooves moved away, grinding on the granite. The voices faded, carried off by the wind. Naichi did not move for a long time. He held his pose, rigid and alert, until the silence of the high desert returned, heavy and ringing. Only then did he exhale. He lowered the hand covering the mare's nose. He turned to Clara. She was trembling violently. It was a full-body shake, her teeth chattering, her hands clutching his shirt so hard her knuckles were white. The adrenaline was leaving her, leaving behind a cold, hollow shock. "It is over," Naichi said softly. "For now." He holstered his knife and put his arms around her. It was not a tentative gesture this time. It was a necessity. He pulled her against him, wrapping his strength around her frailty. Clara buried her face in his neck, sobbing dry. Tearless sobs. I thought. Shh, Naichi soothed, his hand stroking her matted hair. "I am here. They did not take you." They stayed like that for minutes, or perhaps hours. The sun moved across the slice of sky above them, shifting the shadows. In the narrow cleft of the rock, the world narrowed down to just the two of them, the warmth of their bodies the only reality in a universe of hard stone and men with guns. They did not move from the rocks until nightfall. Naichi deemed it too dangerous to travel while the light held. When darkness finally reclaimed the mountains, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind that threaded through the boulder field was icy, carrying the scent of snow from the higher peaks. They huddled together in a small depression at the base of the fissure, shielded from the worst of the draft. They did not risk a fire. They shared the buffalo robe again. But tonight, the space between them had vanished. Clara was still shaking. The terror of the afternoon had settled into her bones. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind, made her flinch. Naichi felt her tremors. He was sitting with his back against the stone. Clara tucked between his legs, her back to his chest, the robe pulled up to their chins. It was a position of protection, but it was undeniably intimate. He could feel the curve of her spine against his chest. He could smell the scent of her skin, sweat and fear, but beneath that, something sweet and womanly that the desert hadn't been able to scour away. "You are cold," he murmured. It's not the cold," Clara stammered. "I can still hear them. Silas's voice. It's inside my head." Naichi shifted one arm, bringing it around her waist to pull her tighter against him. His hand rested flat against her stomach. "Listen to me," he said, his mouth close to her ear. "They are men, just men. They are not spirits. They bleed. They get tired. They will stop for the night and drink their whiskey and sleep. We are awake. We are alive. Clara turned in his arms. The movement was awkward in the confined space, but she needed to see his face. She twisted until she was facing him. Her legs tangled with his under the robe. She looked up. The starlight filtered down into the cleft, painting his face in monochrome. His eyes were dark and endless. "You stayed," she whispered. "When they were close, you stood in front of me. You would have let them kill you." Nietzsche looked at her. His hand moved from her waist to her cheek, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. "I told you," he said, his voice rough. "I do not run away anymore. Not from the things that matter." Clara's breath hitched. She searched his eyes, looking for hesitation, but found only a steady, burning intensity. She realized then that she was safe. Not safe from the world. Perhaps the guns were still out there, but safe with him. He was the fortress she had been looking for. "I trust you," she whispered. Her voice was steady now. "Nietzsche, you are the only man who has ever touched me without hurting me. The only one." The words hung between them, stripping away the last barriers of race and history. Nietzsche's hand trembled slightly against her cheek. He leaned in, his movement slow, giving her every chance to pull away. He was terrified of breaking her. He was terrified that his own desire, which had been growing like a storm in his blood, would be too much. He stopped an inch from her lips. "Clara," he breathed. Clara closed the distance. She lifted her face and pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss of passion. Not at first. It was a question. It was soft, tentative, a testing of the waters. Her lips were dry and chapped, and his were rough, but the contact sent a shock wave through both of them that was more powerful than the fear of the afternoon. Nietzsche froze for a split second. Then he groaned low in his throat. His arm tightened around her waist. He tilted his head, deepening the kiss. It shifted then. The tenderness remained, but underneath it, a hunger woke up, a deep, aching starvation that had nothing to do with food. It was the hunger of two lonely souls who had found a mirror in the dark. Clara's hands came up to grip his shoulders. She opened her mouth slightly, inviting him in. He tasted of pine nuts and smoke. The kiss grew urgent, a desperate affirmation of life in the face of death. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. Their foreheads rested against each other. Clara's heart was racing, but not from fear. "Nietzsche," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. He did not speak. He just held her, his hand tangling in her hair, his breath warm on her face. The danger was still out there, Silas, the posse, the long road to San Cristobal. But in the dark cleft of the rock, something new had been born, something fragile and fierce that might just be strong enough to save them both. "We sleep now," Nietzsche whispered, though his voice was unsteady. Tomorrow we fight again. But tonight," he kissed her forehead, a benediction. "Tonight, we are here." Clara settled back into his arms, pulling the robe up. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she did not dream of cages. She dreamed of cottonwood trees and a valley where the corn grew tall. San Cristobal was not a city on a hill. It was a smudge of timber and adobe clinging to the bend of the muddy Purgatoire River, a testament to the stubbornness of men who insisted on building straight lines in a crooked land. From the ridge where Clara and Nietzsche sat their horses, it looked like a scatter of children's blocks thrown down in the dust. A single main street, churned into deep ruts by wagon wheels, bisected the town. There was a steepled church painted appealing white, a false-fronted hotel, a livery stable that leaked the smell of manure even from this distance, and the inevitable saloon, from which the tinny sound of a piano drifted up on the wind. It smelled of coal smoke, wet sawdust, and unwashed humanity. To Clara, it smelled of danger. Nietzsche pulled the mare up in the shelter of a grove of cottonwoods. Half a mile from the nearest structure, the trees were old, their bark deeply furrowed, their leaves whispering secrets in the breeze. "I go no further," Nietzsche said. He slipped from the saddle and stood by the mare's head, his hand resting on her neck. He looked toward the town with eyes that narrowed into slits. To him, the town was not a refuge. It was a cage. It was a place where men like him were either invisible or dead. Clara slid down, her legs protesting the movement with a familiar, dull ache. She steadied herself against the horse's flank. She looked at Nietzsche, and a sudden, sharp panic seized her chest. For weeks, he had been her shadow, her hands, her strength. The idea of walking into that grid of streets without him felt like walking naked into a blizzard. "You could wait until dark," Clara said, her voice tight. "We could go in together." Nietzsche shook his head slowly. "If I walk down that street, even in the dark, a dog will bark, a drunk will look up, and then the guns will come out. They will not ask who I am. They will only see an Apache. And if they see you with me—" He trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. If she was seen with him, she would not be a victim seeking help. She would be a traitor, a woman who had laid down with the enemy. "Go," Nietzsche commanded gently. "Find the medicine man. I will wait here, in the trees. If you are not back by the time the moon is high, I will be back." Clara interrupted fiercely. "I promise you, I will not let them keep me." She reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the dress Nietzsche had scavenged from an abandoned homestead days earlier. It was faded blue calico, too big in the waist and frayed at the cuffs, but it was whole. It was the uniform of a decent woman. She stepped behind the trunk of a cottonwood and changed, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She smoothed her hair back, pinning it as best she could with a few thorns Nietzsche had gathered, trying to hide the wildness that the desert had whipped into it. When she stepped out, she looked like a ghost of the woman who had left Missouri 3 years ago. Thin, sun-browned, her eyes too big for her face, but undeniably white, undeniably civilized. Nietzsche looked at her, and for a moment, his stoic mask cracked. He looked as if he was already mourning her. He touched her cheek, his thumb rough against her skin. "Walk strong, Clara." She turned and began the long walk toward the buildings. She tried to hide the limp, forcing her hips to move smoothly, but every step was a reminder of the iron. The pain was not the screaming agony of the first days, but a constant, grinding resistance. She could not bring her thighs completely together. The swelling and the scar tissue in her groin prevented it. So she walked with a slightly wide gait, a hitch in her stride that felt like a billboard announcing her shame. As she reached the edge of town, the noise of the settlement washed over her, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the shouting of a teamster cursing his mules, a dog barking. She kept her head down, clutching her shawl tight around her shoulders. She stepped onto the boardwalk, the wood hollow under her boots. A woman in a bonnet, carrying a basket of eggs, passed her. She glanced at Clara, then did a double take. Her eyes widened. She whispered something to the woman beside her. Clara felt the gaze like a physical touch. It crawled over her skin. Isn't that Harlan Gable's wife?" The whisper drifted to her. "I heard she was dead. Or run off. Look at her. Look at the state of her." Clara stared straight ahead, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She fixed her eyes on the sign that swung above a small, dust-caked window. "Dr. A. Vance, physician-surgeon." She pushed the door open and stumbled inside. The office smelled of carbolic acid, rubbing alcohol, and stale pipe tobacco. It was dim and cluttered, books stacked on the floor, jars of strange specimens lining the shelves. A man sat behind a heavy oak desk, scribbling in a ledger. He looked up, peering over spectacles that were smeared with grease. Doctor. Vance was a man who had seen too much of the frontier. His face was a map of broken capillaries, hinting at a fondness for the bottle, but his eyes were sharp and gray. He wore a stained frock coat, and his hands, resting on the paper, were steady. "Help you, ma'am," he grunted. Clara closed the door and leaned against it, her strength suddenly leaving her. I need help," she whispered. Vance squinted. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "Mrs. Gable?" The recognition made her flinch. Please, she said. I have money. I have... She realized she had nothing. Naichi had no coin. Vance came around the desk. He didn't ask about money. He looked at her face, then at the way she was standing, weight on one leg, feet apart, clutching the doorframe. Sit down, he said, his voice dropping the gruff edge. He helped her to the examination table in the back room. He pulled a curtain across the window. Tell me, he said. Clara told him. Not the whole story. She did not mention Naichi. She told him of the birth, the damage, the restraints, the escape. Vance listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change, but the lines around his mouth deepened. When she finished, he gestured for her to lie down. I need to see the damage. Clara... The exam was a humiliation, but it was a clinical one. Vance was professional. He used a metal speculum that was cold and uncomfortable, but his hands were gentle. He prodded the scar tissue around her ankles, then examined the deeper, more intimate injuries in her pelvis and thighs. When he was done, he washed his hands in a basin, scrubbing them until they were pink. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass and handed it to her. Drink, he ordered. Clara took a sip. The liquor burned, but it settled her stomach. You are not ruined, Vance said, drying his hands on a towel, but you have been butchered. He pulled a stool over and sat down. The restraints caused deep ulcerations. Those are healing, but the scar tissue is tightening. That is why you cannot walk properly. But the internal damage, that is from the birth, compounded by the infection from the iron. You have severe inflammation in the pelvic floor. The muscles are in spasm. They have locked up to protect you from the pain. He looked her in the eye. It makes closing your legs agony because the tissue is swollen 3 times its normal size. But it is not permanent. Clara felt a sob rise in her throat. It's not. No, it will take time. I can give you a salve for the scars, something with arnica and laudanum to numb the nerves. And you need to rest. Truly rest. Not riding, not running. In a few months, the inflammation will subside. There is a minor surgery I could do later to release the tightest bands of scar tissue, but for now, you will heal. You are young, and the body is stubborn. Clara covered her face with her hands and wept. It was the first time anyone in authority had told her that she was not a monster, not a broken thing to be discarded. While Clara wept in the doctor's office, Naichi stood in the shadow of the cottonwoods, watching the river flow. The water was brown and sluggish, carrying the silt of the mountains down to the plains. It reminded him of time, relentless, indifferent. He checked the load in his Winchester for the 10th time. He adjusted the knife at his belt. His body was here, standing guard, but his spirit was pacing the streets of the town. He hated this. He hated the waiting. Every instinct he had screamed at him to go to her, to stand between her and the gawks of the townsfolk. He remembered the last time he had been in a town like this. It had been under a flag of truce, years ago. The soldiers had promised food. Instead, they had given whiskey and insults. He remembered the way the white men looked at Apache women, with a mixture of revulsion and predatory hunger. He closed his eyes and saw Clara's face. He saw the way she had looked at him in the rock cleft, the trust that had shone through her fear. She will not come back, a dark voice whispered in his mind. Why would she? She is white. She belongs to that world of houses and beds and doctors. He was just a savage who had found her in the dirt. He was a temporary necessity. Now that she was safe, now that she was among her own kind, she would realize the madness of running with him. She would realize that he was death-walking. He gripped the bark of the cottonwood tree until the rough ridges dug into his palm. If she stays, he told himself, I will ride north alone. I will not drag her back to the dark. But the thought of the empty trail, of the nights without her warmth beside him, felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He had lost his wife to bullets. He did not want to lose Clara to civilization. Clara left the doctor's office with a jar of salve and a small packet of powders tucked into her pocket. She felt lighter, but the weight of her situation was still crushing. She had hope for her body, but she had no safety. She walked to the sheriff's office. It was a brick building with a heavy iron door. Sheriff Miller was sitting on the boardwalk, whittling a piece of pine, He was a heavy man with a mustache that hid his mouth and a tin star pinned to a greasy vest. "Sheriff," Clara said. Miller looked up. He stopped whittling. "Well now, if it ain't the runaway. I need help," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "My husband, Harlan. He abused me. He shackled me like an animal. He is hunting me with a posse. I need protection." Miller spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the torn hem of her dress. "Harlan Gable is a respected man. Mrs. Gable. He pays his taxes. He supplies beef to the reservation. I find it hard to believe a man like that would chain up his wife unless he had a damn good reason." "He chained me because I was sick," Clara cried. "Because I lost our child." Miller stood up. He loomed over her. "I heard you lost the baby because you were frail, and I heard you ran off. Harlan says you're hysterical, says you ain't right in the head." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And I heard rumors about tracks, Apache tracks." Clara went cold. "If you've been spreading your legs for a redskin, Mrs. Gable, then Harlan was right to chain you up. That ain't just running away. That's treason against your race." Clara backed away. The hate in his eyes was naked. It wasn't just sexism. It was a deep, tribal loathing. She turned and ran, stumbling toward the church. Surely the preacher. But the reverend, a thin man with a face like a dried apple, was no better. He met her on the steps of the church. He did not invite her in. "Go back to your husband." "Daughter," he intoned, blocking the door. "Submission is the wife's duty. Whatever burden he has placed on you, it is God's will that you bear it. If you have sinned with a savage, then you must pray for forgiveness in the house of your master, not here." The town was closing ranks. They did not see a victim. They saw a woman who had broken the code. She had rejected a white man of property for the wilderness, and for that, she was excommunicate. Clara walked away from the church, her vision blurred by tears of rage. They wanted her dead, or worse, they wanted her back in the barn. She reached the edge of town, near the river, intending to run back to the trees, back to Naichi. "Psst! Hey!" The voice came from the shadow of a tumble-down shack that sat apart from the other houses, near the water's edge. Clara stopped. A woman stepped out. She was older, perhaps 40, with skin the color of café au lait and hair streaked with gray. She wore a peasant blouse and a wide skirt. "I saw you," the woman said. "I saw you with the sheriff and the preacher." She walked closer. Her eyes were dark and kind, and she looked at Clara with a recognition that cut through the pretenses. "They will not help you, Chula. To them, you are dirty." Clara wiped her face. "I have nowhere to go." The woman nodded toward the trees where Naichi was hiding. "You have him," she said softly. Clara froze. "You saw? I see everything. My name is Elena. My father was Mescalero. My mother was Mexican. I live between the lines, like you do now." Elena gestured to her shack. "It is small, but the roof holds the rain, and the sheriff does not come here. He is afraid of my herbs. He thinks I am a witch." She smiled, a flash of white teeth. "Bring him. Come inside, before the sun goes down." The shack was tiny, smelling of dried sage, chili peppers, and beeswax. But to Clara and Naichi, it was a palace. Naichi had come in under the cover of dusk, moving like a shadow through the river reeds. When he stepped into the candlelight of the shack, gun in hand, Elena had simply pointed to the stew pot on the cast-iron stove. "Eat," she had said. "War waits for a full belly." Now, 3 days had passed. The shack had become a sanctuary. Elena slept in the loft. She gave Clara and Naichi the narrow cot in the main room. It was the first time they had been truly alone, safe from the elements and the immediate threat of discovery. The doctor's salve was working. The angry red inflammation around Clara's ankles was fading to a dull pink. The deep, aching pressure in her pelvis was lessening. For the first time in months, she could sit without wincing. She could walk across the room with only a ghost of a limp. But the healing was more than physical. In the quiet hours of the night, with the fire crackling in the stove and the river murmuring outside, they talked. They lay side by side on the narrow cot, fully clothed, staring at the rough timber ceiling. Naichi spoke of the ceremonies of his people, the sunrise dance for the young girls, the way the drums sounded like the heartbeat of the earth. He spoke of the fear that his culture was vanishing like smoke. Clara spoke of her books, the ones Harlan had burned. She spoke of poetry, reciting lines she had memorized to keep herself sane in the dark barn. And as the pain in her body receded, another feeling began to take its place. A longing. It started as a warmth in her chest when he looked at her across the table. It grew into a physical ache when his arm brushed hers. She watched him. She watched the way he moved. So careful not to take up space, so gentle with her. She saw the way he looked at her mouth when she spoke. He wanted her. She knew it. But he would never ask. He would never cross that line, because he knew what she had suffered. He treated her like glass, precious, but fragile. But she was not glass. She was flesh and blood. On the fourth night, the rain returned. It beat a soft rhythm against the roof. The candle had burned down to a nub. They lay on the cot. Naichi was on his back, his breathing steady. Clara was on her side, facing him. She looked at his profile. She reached out and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. Naichi stopped breathing. He went perfectly still. "Clara," he warned softly. Clara moved her hand down to his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, betraying his calm exterior. "The doctor said I am healing," she whispered. Naichi turned his head. His eyes were dark fire in the gloom. "You are still hurt. I do not want to." "You won't hurt me," she interrupted. She took his hand, the large, rough hand that had cleaned her wounds, carried her through the storm, and held a rifle against the world for her, and she guided it. She moved his hand to her waist. Then, slowly, she moved it lower, to the curve of her hip. She watched his eyes. She saw the conflict there, the desire warring with the terrifying fear of causing her pain. "I am not broken, Naichi," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "Harlan tried to break me. He tried to make me hate my own body. If I stop living, if I stop wanting, then he wins." She pressed herself closer to him. "I want to win. I want to choose. I choose you." Naichi let out a shuddering breath. He raised his other hand and cupped her face. "You are sure?" he rasped. "Yes." He kissed her then. It was not like the kiss in the rocks. That had been desperate. This was deliberate. It was slow. He moved with agonizing slowness. He let her set the pace. When his hand moved to her leg, he paused, waiting for her to flinch. When she didn't, when she instead sighed and opened to him, he moved a fraction further. Clara felt a flicker of the old pain, the ghost of the iron, the stiffness of the scars, but it was drowned out by the sensation of his skin against hers. His touch was reverence. He treated her scars not as deformities, but as holy ground. When they finally joined, it was not the violent, taking act she had known with Harlan. It was a giving. Naichi held his weight off her, his muscles trembling with the effort of restraint. He watched her face, his eyes locked on hers, searching for any sign of distress. Clara gasped, her hands gripping his shoulders. There was pain. Yes, a sharp reminder of what had been done to her, but there was also pleasure, a fierce, reclaiming heat that started in her center and radiated out, burning away the shame. She realized, with a jolt of pure joy, that she could do this. She could close her legs around him. She could hold him. Her body was hers again. "Naichi," she whispered, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. He stopped, concerned. "Hurt?" "No," she sobbed, laughing through the tears. "No, alive. I am alive." She pulled him down to her. And in the small, shadowy shack on the edge of a hostile town, while the rain washed the world outside, they forged a bond that was stronger than iron. It was a claiming. They belonged to no country, to no tribe, to no town. They belonged, finally and completely, to each other. The peace in the shack by the river was a bubble, iridescent and beautiful, but terrified of the slightest needle. That needle arrived 3 days later in the form of a breathless Elena. bursting through the door just as the sun began to bleed its final red light into the muddy water of the purgatoire. She slammed the door and threw the latch, her chest heaving. Nietzsche was on his feet in an instant, the Colt revolver he had taken from a dead soldier years ago already in his hand. Clara sat up on the cot, clutching the blanket to her chest, the cold knot of dread returning to her stomach. "They are coming," Elena whispered. Her face was gray with fear. "Who?" Nietzsche asked. His voice was calm, but it was the calm of a coiled rattlesnake. "Harlan Gable," Elena said. She moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "He rode in an hour ago. He has 6 men with him, not just ranch hands, hired guns from Dodge, men with cold eyes." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Harlan. The name alone made the phantom pain in her ankles flare. "He went straight to the saloon," Elena continued, turning back to them. "He is buying drinks for the town. He is shouting that an Apache savage kidnapped his wife. He says you raped her. Clara, he says he will pay $500 to the man who helps him string Nietzsche up and bring you home." "He lies," Clara said, her voice shaking. Elena looked at her with pity. "It does not matter what is true. It matters what they want to believe. The town smells money, and they smell blood. The sheriff is with him. They are organizing a posse for the morning. They say they will search every shack, every barn. They say they will burn me out if I am hiding you." Nietzsche holstered the gun. He moved to the small table and began shoving their meager supplies into a sack, a loaf of bread, a pouch of dried meat, the remaining salve. "We leave," he said. "Now." "Where?" Clara asked. She stood up, her legs trembling. Nietzsche looked at her. His eyes were hard, stripping away the tenderness of the last few nights. He was a warrior again. "The mountains," he said, "to the high country." Clara hesitated. The mountains were Apache land, hostile land. But looking at Elena's terrified face, she realized there was no choice. The town, the law, the church, they had all turned their backs. Elena grabbed Clara's hand. "Go, Chula. If you stay, they will hang him, and they will give you back to Gable. And this time, he will not just chain you. He will break you until there is nothing left." The reality hit Clara like a physical blow. She looked at the small room where she had found her first taste of freedom. It was over. The interlude was done. "We go," Clara said. They slipped out the back of the shack under the cover of a moonless dark. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and impending violence. They moved like ghosts through the reeds along the riverbank, reaching the cottonwoods where the mare was tethered. Nietzsche helped Clara into the saddle. She winced as her thighs stretched, but she did not complain. The pain was an old friend now, one she could ignore. Nietzsche took the bridle. He did not look back at the town, where the lights of the saloon spilled yellow onto the dust and the sound of drunken laughter drifted on the wind. He turned the horse's head toward the north, toward the jagged black silhouette of the peaks. "We ride hard," he said, "before the sun sees us." The journey into the foothills was a brutal ascent. As the night wore on, the air grew thin and sharp, biting at their lungs. The landscape shifted from the rolling scrub of the high desert to steep, rocky inclines covered in pinon and juniper, and then to the towering ponderosa pines that blocked out the stars. Clara rode in silence, gripping the saddle horn. The mare struggled on the loose shale, her hooves striking sparks that terrified Clara in the darkness. Every slip felt like the beginning of a fall that would never end. Nietzsche walked ahead, relentless. He did not stop to rest. He knew that Harlan would have trackers. He knew that by dawn, the posse would find their trail at the riverbank. By the time the sun crested the eastern ridges, painting the snow-capped peaks in brilliant shades of rose and gold, they were high above the world. The air here tasted of ice and resin. Patches of old snow clung to the shadows of the rocks. Nietzsche finally halted in a small clearing bordered by aspen trees. The mare was blowing hard, her sides heaving with sweat that steamed in the cold air. "We rest for a moment," Nietzsche said. He offered Clara the canteen. She drank, her teeth chattering against the tin rim. She looked back the way they had come, far below. The desert floor was a haze of brown and gray. "Do you think they are following?" she asked. Naichi did not look down. He looked at the trail ahead. "He is a man of pride," Naichi said. "A man like that does not stop until he has crushed the thing that defied him. He follows." He looked at Clara. His expression was grave. "Where we go? It is not safe. You mean the mountains?" "I mean the people," Naichi said. "There is a camp, 2 ridges over. It is the band of Goyakla, the one you call Geronimo, but he is not there. It is a small group, led by an old one named Nana." He paused, looking at his hands. "They know me, and they know what happened at Bitter Springs. They think I brought the soldiers down on my own family. They think I am bad medicine." "And me?" Clara asked softly. Naichi met her eyes. "You are a white eye. To them, you are the wife of the enemy. You are the reason their children starve and their land is stolen. They will not welcome you." Clara felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the wind. She was trading the hatred of her own people for the hatred of his. She was truly alone, anchored only by the man standing before her. "But what choice do we have?" she asked. "None," Naichi said. "We have no choice but to live." They pushed on. The terrain grew wilder. They crossed icy streams that numbed the mare's legs. They scrambled up rock faces where Naichi had to practically carry the horse, coaxing her with soft words while Clara climbed on hands and knees. By late afternoon, they reached the camp. It was hidden in a deep bowl of granite, shielded on 3 sides by sheer cliffs. A dozen wickiups, domed shelters made of brush and canvas, were scattered among the boulders. Smoke curled lazily from small fires. As they approached, a dog barked, a sharp, jagged sound. Then another. Figures emerged from the shelters. Men with rifles, women with hard, suspicious faces, children who stopped their play to stare. Naichi stopped the horse at the edge of the camp. He held his empty hands up, palms forward. "I come in peace," he called out in Apache. A silence stretched, heavy and taut as a bowstring. Then, an old man stepped forward. He was stooped, his face a web of wrinkles, leaning on a rifle that looked as old as he was. He wore a heavy wool coat and high moccasins. "Naichi," the old man said. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "You still walk the earth, Nana?" Naichi said, inclining his head. "I seek shelter." For one night, Nana's eyes shifted to Clara. She sat frozen on the horse, acutely aware of her pale skin, her blue calico dress, the very whiteness of her existence. She saw disgust in the old man's eyes. She saw hate. "You bring a white eye here?" Nana spat. "You bring the sickness to our fire?" "She is not sickness," Naichi said, his voice firm. "She is hunted. Like us, her own people seek to kill her. And why should we care if the wolves eat one of their own?" A younger warrior shouted from behind Nana. "Let them have her. Maybe they will leave us be." Naichi stepped between the horse and the warrior. "She is under my protection," he said. "She has shared my fire. She has shared my blanket." A murmur went through the camp. To claim a white woman as a wife, even a temporary one, was a transgression to some, a curiosity to others. Nana studied Naichi for a long time. He looked at the exhaustion in Naichi's face. He looked at Clara, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also the way she held her head high, refusing to look away. "One night," Nana said finally, "because your father was a great man, Naichi. Not because of you, but if she brings trouble, her blood is on your hands." The camp did not welcome them. They were given a spot on the far periphery, away from the main fires. No one offered food. No one spoke to them. Clara felt the weight of 100 eyes on her back as she slid from the saddle. She sat on the buffalo robe, close to Naichi. "They hate me," she whispered. "They fear you," Naichi corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. "You remind them of what they have lost." He began to clean his rifle, his movements mechanical. "Naichi," Clara said, "if Harlan comes, if he tracks us here." "He will come," Naichi said. "Then you must give me to him." Naichi froze. He looked at her with a ferocity that startled her. "Never. But they will kill you," Clara cried. Your own people might let them do it just to be rid of us. Then I die, Nietzsche said. But I do not give you back to the chain. I do not give you back to the man who made you bleed. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was crushing. We are together, Clara, in the dark, in the light, in death. The sun was beginning to dip behind the western peaks when the shouting started. It came from the ridge above the camp, the one spot where the rock wall dipped low enough to allow a man to look down. Hey! The voice boomed down into the bowl of the camp, amplified by the acoustics of the stone. It was a voice Clara knew better than her own heartbeat. Deep, arrogant, Harlan. The camp exploded into activity. Warriors grabbed their weapons and scrambled for cover behind boulders. Women grabbed children and pulled them into the wickiups. Nietzsche was up instantly, pulling Clara behind a slab of fallen granite. He shoved the Winchester into her hands. Stay down, he ordered. Do not move. He drew his Colt and crouched beside her. Above them, on the ridge, silhouettes appeared against the dying light. 7 men on horseback. They were outlined in fire by the setting sun. I know you're down there, Harlan shouted. I want my wife. Nana stepped out into the open, looking small and frail against the vastness of the cliffs. He shouted back in broken English. Go away! No white woman here. Don't lie to me, old man, Harlan roared. We found the tracks. I know that bastard Nietzsche has her. Send her up. Send her up and we leave you be. Keep her, and we come down there and kill every last one of you. A shot rang out. One of Harlan's men fired into the air, the crack echoing like a cannon blast. Panic rippled through the Apache camp. The younger warrior who had challenged Nietzsche earlier turned on him, his face twisted with rage. Give her to them, he shouted. Why should we die for a white whore? He raised his rifle, pointing it not at the ridge, but at Clara. Nietzsche stepped in front of the barrel. You will have to kill me first, he snarled. The warrior hesitated. In that second of indecision, another shot came from the ridge. This one was not a warning. It kicked up dirt at Nana's feet. That broke the dam. The Apache warriors returned fire. Puffs of smoke bloomed from behind the rocks. From the ridge, the posse unleashed a volley of lead that whined off the stone and thudded into the earth. It was chaos. The noise was deafening. The sharp crack of the Winchesters, the boom of the heavy buffalo guns the posse carried, the screaming of horses. Clara curled into a ball, her hands over her ears. She was the center of this storm. Men were killing each other because of her, because one man thought he owned her. Nietzsche was firing. He was calm, methodical. He braced his arm on the rock, took aim, and fired. He was fighting for his life, but he was also fighting for the people who had rejected him. He was standing between the enemy and the camp, proving with every pull of the trigger that he was not a coward. The posse began to push down the slope. They had the high ground, and they had better weapons. They moved from rock to rock, closing the distance. Clara saw Harlan. He had dismounted and was making his way down a scree slope, a heavy pistol in his hand. He looked like a demon. His duster coat flapped around him. His face was red with exertion and rage. He was coming for her. Nietzsche saw him too. He shifted his aim, but his revolver clicked empty. He cursed, dropping down to reload. The younger warrior who had wanted to give Clara up was hit. He spun around, clutching his shoulder, and fell near them. Nietzsche didn't hesitate. He grabbed the warrior's rifle and popped up to fire. Harlan saw him. There, Harlan screamed. There's the savage. The posse concentrated their fire on Nietzsche's position. Bullets chipped the rock inches from his face, sending stone splinters into his skin. He was pinned down. Harlan advanced. He was 50 yards away, then 40. Come out, Nietzsche, Harlan bellowed. Come out and die like a man, or are you hiding behind my wife's skirts? Nietzsche looked at Clara. There was blood on his cheek from a stone cut. His eyes were wide, desperate. He knew he could not hold them off. Clara looked at the Winchester in her hands. She had never fired a gun at a man. She looked at Harlan. He was so close now she could see the sweat on his lip. She could see the madness in his eyes. Something snapped inside her. The fear that had ruled her life for 3 years simply evaporated. burned away by a white-hot clarity. She was not a thing. She was not a possession to be fought over. She stood up. "Clara!" Nietzsche screamed, lunging for her leg. She stepped out from behind the rock, into the open. The wind caught her skirt, whipping the blue calico around her legs. The firing faltered. The sudden appearance of a woman in the middle of the kill zone startled both sides. Harlan stopped. He lowered his gun slightly. He smiled, a grotesque, triumphant twisting of his lips. "There you are," he said, panting. "Come here, Clara. Come to me." Clara did not move. She stood tall, her chin lifted. She looked at him, and then she looked up at the ridge and around at the Apache warriors who were watching her. "No!" she screamed. The word echoed off the canyon walls. "I am not your wife. I am not your property." Harlan's smile faltered. "You're delirious, girl. Get down here before you get hurt." She took a step forward, pointing a shaking finger at him. "Tell them," she shrieked. "Tell them what you did." She grabbed her skirt and hiked it up, exposing the scars on her ankles, the twisted pink flesh where the iron had eaten her. "Look," she screamed to the posse, to the Apaches, to God himself. "Look at what a respected man does. He chained me. He shackled me in a barn like a dog because I couldn't give him a son." Harlan's face turned a violent purple. "Shut your mouth! He killed my baby!" Clara yelled, her voice tearing at her throat. "He blamed me, and he broke me, and he locked me in iron." The silence that followed was heavy. The men on the ridge, hired guns, yes, but men with some code of the frontier, lowered their rifles. They looked at the scars on her legs. They looked at Harlan. "That ain't right," one of the men on the ridge muttered loud enough to be heard. "You said she was crazy. Harlan, you didn't say you ironed her." Harlan looked around. He saw the doubt in his own men's eyes. He saw the judgment. His authority, built on money and fear, was crumbling. He looked back at Clara, the source of his humiliation, the witness to his sins. "You bitch," he hissed. He raised his pistol. He didn't care about bringing her back anymore. He just wanted to stop the voice. Nietzsche roared. He scrambled up from behind the rock, abandoning cover, placing his body between Clara and the gun. Harlan fired. The bullet struck Nietzsche in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell hard. Clara screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Harlan cocked the hammer again. He stepped closer. The executioner. "I'll kill you both," he spat. The crack of a rifle cut him off. It did not come from the posse. It came from the rocks to the left. Harlan jerked. He looked down at his chest. A red flower was blooming on his duster, right over his heart. He looked surprised. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. He collapsed forward, face first into the dirt. Silence descended on the hillside. Nana lowered his ancient rifle. Smoke drifted from the barrel. The old man stood still, his face impassive. He had not fired to save the white woman. He had fired because an enemy had come into his home and threatened his peace. On the ridge, the posse looked at Harlan's body. Then they looked at the Apache warriors, who were rising from cover, weapons ready. The hired guns looked at each other. The paycheck was dead. The fight was over. "Let's ride," one of them said. They turned their horses and disappeared over the crest of the ridge, leaving the dead man where he lay. Clara did not watch them go. She was pressing her hands against Nietzsche's shoulder, trying to staunch the blood that pulsed between her fingers. "Nietzsche," she sobbed. "Stay with me, please." Nietzsche opened his eyes. He grimaced, pain etching deep lines around his mouth. He looked at Clara. He looked at the dead body of Harlan Gable. "It is done," he whispered. He reached up with his good hand and touched her face, smearing a streak of his blood on her cheek. "You spoke," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "You spoke loud." Clara leaned her forehead against his chest, weeping with relief and terror. Around them, the Apache warriors emerged. They looked at Harlan's body with indifference. Then they looked at Clara. There was no warmth in their eyes, but the disgust was gone. They had seen her scars. They had heard her scream. They had seen her stand when other men hid. She was still a white eye. but she was a white eye who had bled. Nana walked over. He looked down at Naichi, then at Clara. "Take him to the fire," the old man said gruffly. "The bullet must come out." Clara looked up at him, nodding mutely. She put her arm under Naichi's good side. With a groan, he pushed himself up. Together, leaning on each other, they walked back toward the campfires. Behind them, the sun finally slipped below the horizon, leaving the canyon in shadow. But they were walking toward the light. The gun smoke lifted slowly from the canyon, drifting up toward the first stars like the ghosts of the violent day. The silence that followed the shooting was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the Apache camp. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the stunned, ringing quiet of survival. Harlan Gable lay where he had fallen. His duster coat spread around him like the dark wings of a carrion bird. His men were gone, vanishing over the ridge as quickly as their courage had failed them. The threat was over, but the cost was etched into the faces of everyone in the bowl of granite. Clara sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she washed the blood from Naichi's shoulder. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the deltoid, missing the bone but tearing muscle. It was a clean wound, or as clean as a gunshot could be, but the blood was bright and hot on her fingers. "Hold still," she whispered, her voice sounding thin in the vast night. Naichi gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as the old medicine woman, a crone with hands like dried roots, packed the wound with moss and spider webs to stop the bleeding. He did not cry out. He looked at Clara. His eyes were glazed with pain, but beneath the agony, there was a look of profound wonder. "You stood," he rasped. "You stood in front of the gun." Clara paused, the rag hovering over his skin. "I could not let him take you. He would have killed you," Naichi said. "He killed me a long time ago," Clara answered, looking at the fire. Today was just the first time I decided to live again." Around them, the camp was settling into an uneasy rhythm. The wounded warriors were being tended to. The younger men cast dark, resentful glances at the pair by the fire. To them, Naichi and Clara were lightning rods, drawing the storm of the white world down upon their heads. Nana, the old leader, walked over. He leaned on his rifle, looking down at Harlan's body, which 2 warriors were dragging toward the ravine to be left for the coyotes. "He is dead," Nana said flatly. "But others will come. The army, the law. They will not forget that an Apache killed a white rancher." "He came to kill us," Naichi said, struggling to sit up. Nana nodded. "I know. That is why you are still breathing. Naichi, you fought for the people today. You did not run." The old man shifted his gaze to Clara. "And the woman, she has fire. She shamed her own kind. That is something I have never seen." He sighed. "A sound like wind in dry grass. But you cannot stay. You are bad medicine here. The soldiers will come looking for the man who killed Gable. If they find you here, they burn the camp. You have 2 days. Let the wound scab over. Then you go." Naichi nodded. It was more than he had expected. "We will go." 2 days later, they rode out. They did not look back at the camp that had offered them a grudging, temporary sanctuary. They turned their faces north, toward the deepest, most rugged spine of the mountains. They were exiles now in the truest sense. Clara was dead to her people, a woman who had chosen a savage over a husband. Naichi was a ghost to his tribe, a warrior who walked a path no one else could follow. They traveled for a week, moving slowly to spare Naichi's shoulder and Clara's healing legs. They climbed past the timberline, where the air was so thin it made their heads spin, and down into the valleys that mapmakers had not yet ruined with their ink. They found the valley by accident. It was not a paradise. It was a narrow slash in the earth, hidden behind a fortress of gray granite ridges. The soil was rocky, studded with stubborn pines and juniper. The stream that cut through the center was cold and fast, fed by snowmelt. It was a hard place, a place that demanded sweat for every scrap of comfort. Naichi stopped the mare at the head of the valley. He looked at the isolation, the way the ridges blocked out the horizon, hiding them from the world below. "Here," he said. Clara looked at the wild, overgrown grass and the steep walls. It looked nothing like the soft, green pastures of Missouri. It looked formidable. "Here?" she asked. "The world cannot see us here," Naichi said. "We build," and so they began the slow, aching work of survival. They had nothing but the tools Naichi carried: an axe, a knife, a few blankets, and the horse. For the first month, they slept in a lean-to made of pine boughs, huddled together against the biting frost that lingered even into late spring. Naichi felled trees, with one good arm and one healing shoulder. He swung the axe with a grim determination. Clara stripped the bark, her hands blistering and bleeding until calluses formed. Thick and protective, they dragged the logs into place, notching them with clumsy, desperate precision. The cabin rose slowly. It was not a majestic ranch house. It was a rough, squat square of timber, chinked with mud and moss. The roof was made of shakes split from cedar. The floor was packed earth. But the first night they slept inside, with a heavy wooden door barred against the wind. Clara felt a peace she had not known in the big house with the velvet curtains. "This is ours," she whispered into the dark. Naichi's hand found hers under the buffalo robe. "No one enters unless we open the door," he said. Summer came, baking the valley floor. They cleared a patch of ground near the stream. It was back-breaking work. They had to pry rocks from the soil with pry bars made of hardened oak. They planted the few seeds Elena had pressed into Clara's hand. Corn, beans, squash. The garden was a battleground. The deer tried to eat the shoots. The crows tried to steal the seeds. Clara guarded it like a mother wolf. She carried water from the stream in a hollowed-out gourd until Naichi fashioned a bucket from bark and pitch. As the cabin grew and the corn stalks pushed their way up through the rocky soil, Clara's body began to change. The constant, agonizing fire in her legs had dulled to a low, manageable throb. The doctor's salve, combined with the weeks of rest during their travel, had allowed the deep ulcerations to close. The scar tissue was thick and white, roping around her ankles and across her inner thighs, marking her skin like a map of her suffering. But the infection was gone. One afternoon, Clara was by the stream, washing their clothes. She stood up to wring out Naichi's shirt. She paused, realizing something. She was standing straight. Her feet were together. Her knees were touching. For months, the swelling in her groin and the tightness of the scars had forced her to stand with a wide, awkward stance. Closing her legs had been a physical impossibility, a source of burning torture. She looked down. Her skirt brushed the tops of her boots. She pressed her thighs together. There was a pull, a tightness, but no pain. She dropped the wet shirt. A sob escaped her throat, sudden and violent. Naichi, who was chopping wood nearby, dropped his axe and ran to her. He thought she had been bitten by a snake. "Clara, what is it?" She pointed to her legs. "Look." Naichi looked. He saw her standing tall, her posture natural, her legs closed. He stopped. He understood the magnitude of the moment. It was a quiet miracle. The iron ghost that had haunted her steps, forcing her to walk in a parody of openness, had finally been exorcised. "You are whole," he said softly. Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I will always have the marks, but I can close them. I can choose." Naichi stepped into the water, boots and all. He took her face in his hands and kissed her. It was a kiss of celebration, tasting of salt and river water. Yet, the past did not let go easily. The ghosts came at night. Naichi would wake up shouting, thrashing in the buffalo robes, his mind back at Bitter Springs, smelling the burning lodges, hearing the screams of his wife and daughter. He would sit up, chest heaving, his eyes wide and unseeing in the dark. Clara would reach for him. She would pull his sweating body down against hers, murmuring soft, meaningless words until the terror receded. "I am here," she would whisper. "The fire is out. You are here." And sometimes it was Clara who woke. She would jolt awake with a gasp, her hands clawing at her ankles, convinced that the iron cuffs were there. cold and biting. She would feel the phantom weight of the chain dragging her down. Naichi would hold her feet. He would wrap his large, warm hands around her ankles, covering the scars, anchoring her to the present. "No iron," he would say, his voice deep and rumbling against her ear. "Only skin, only flesh." Their intimacy became a part of the healing. In the beginning, they were careful, almost clinical, terrified of hurting each other. But as the seasons turned, as the aspen leaves turned to gold and then fell, their lovemaking grew deeper. It was not the frantic, stolen passion of their flight. It was steady. It was a language they invented in the dark. Clara learned to trust the weight of his body, learning that heaviness did not mean captivity. Naichi learned that his strength could be a shelter, not a weapon. There were nights when Clara would trace the bullet scar on his shoulder, and he would trace the ropey white lines on her thighs. They were reading the history of their survival on each other's skin. The valley did not stay empty forever. The West was a place of displacement. The wars, the fences, the railroads. They churned people up and spit them out, and some of that driftwood washed up in their valley. The first to come was a family of 4, the Jeffersons. They were black settlers who had tried to homestead on the plains, only to be burned out by night riders who didn't want colored folk on the land. They came over the pass in a wagon with a broken wheel, leading a mule that was mostly ribs. Naichi met them at the head of the valley, rifle in hand. Clara stood beside him. Thomas Jefferson, a man with shoulders like a bull and eyes that had seen too much sorrow, looked at the Apache warrior and the white woman standing together. He didn't blink. He didn't judge. "We just need a place to rest the mule." Thomas said, "We ain't looking for trouble." Clara looked at the woman beside him, who held a baby wrapped in a faded quilt. She saw the same look in her eyes that she had seen in her own reflection months ago, the look of the hunted. "There is water by the willows," Clara said, "and we have extra corn." They stayed. They built a cabin on the far side of the stream. Thomas was a blacksmith, and the ring of his hammer on the anvil became the heartbeat of the valley. Next came the Morales couple, elderly Mexican sheep herders whose flock had been scattered by a cattle baron's men. They brought with them a few surviving sheep and a knowledge of the mountains that saved the community during a harsh winter. Then came a man named Silent John, a white prospector who had lost his mind to mercury and solitude, but who could find water in a stone. It was a motley collection of outcasts. They did not fit in the towns with the churches and the laws. They did not fit in the tribes. They fit only here, in the cracks of the world. They formed a fragile, unspoken pact. No one asked about the past. No one asked why a white woman lived with an Apache. They judged each other only by the work they did and the help they offered. Prejudice still existed beyond the ridges. They knew that if they went to town, they would be spat upon. But in the valley, united by exile, they built a strange, new kind of family. The second winter was harder than the first. The snow piled up to the eaves of the cabin. The wind howled like a banshee for weeks on end. It was during the long, dark nights of February that Clara began to suspect her courses had stopped. At first, she blamed the cold and the meager rations. But then came the sickness, the morning nausea that sent her rushing to the bucket, the tenderness in her breasts. She sat by the fire one morning, wrapping her shawl tight around her. The realization terrified her. She remembered the barn. She remembered the blood. She remembered the silence of the baby girl who never cried. Naichi came in from the snow, stamping his feet. He carried a frozen rabbit. He looked at her, seeing her pale face. "You are sick?" he asked, dropping the rabbit on the table. Clara looked at him. I think I am with child." Naichi went still. The color drained from his face under the bronze of his skin. He, too, was remembering. The fire. The daughter he could not save. He sat down heavily on the bench opposite her. "A child," he whispered. Clara began to weep. "I can't do it again. Naichi, I can't lose it. I can't let it be born into this cold. What if my body is too broken? What if the iron ruined me inside?" Naichi moved to her. He knelt on the dirt floor and put his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her lap. "We are not in the barn," he said fiercely. "We are not alone. Elena showed you the herbs. The Morales woman knows the birthing way." He looked up at her, his eyes wet. "This child is not death. Clara, this child is the answer to the death." Fear remained, a cold stone in her gut, but as the winter thawed and the green shoots pushed through the snow, the stone began to dissolve. Her belly swelled. The life inside her was vigorous. It kicked and turned, a constant reminder that life goes on, stubborn and relentless. Thomas Jefferson made a cradle from walnut wood. Mrs. Morales knitted tiny socks from the wool of her sheep. The community wrapped itself around Clara, protecting the hope she carried. It was late summer. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and dust. The crickets were singing their evening chorus. Clara sat in the doorway of the cabin, shelling beans into a bowl. She was heavy now, 8 months along. Her ankles were swollen, not from iron this time, but from the weight of the child. Nietzsche was repairing a fence near the garden. He stopped to wipe the sweat from his brow and walked over to her. He poured a ladle of water from the bucket and drank, watching her. Clara shifted on the stool. She groaned, stretching her legs out in front of her. Her belly was so large that her legs naturally fell open, her knees wide apart to accommodate the mound of her stomach. She looked down at herself. She looked at the scars on her ankles, silvery white in the evening light. And then she looked at the curve of her belly, the skin tight and drum-like. She started to laugh. It was a breathless, wheezing sound. "What is funny?" Nietzsche asked, smiling slightly. Clara wiped a tear from her eye. She gestured to her sprawling posture. "Look at me, Nietzsche." She patted her stomach. "I can't close my legs," she said, her voice shaking with mirth and something deeper. "I can't close them at all." Nietzsche looked down. He saw the woman he had found dying in the dirt. He saw the raw, infected meat that had been her legs. He saw the creature that had been hunted like an animal. And now, he saw this. He saw her legs spread not in pain, not in shame, not in torture, but in life. He saw the scars. Yes, but they were just lines on a map now. The territory they marked was full. It was ripe. He dropped to his knees in the dust. He placed his large, calloused hands on her knees, then slid them up to cup the swell of her belly. He felt the child kick against his palm, a strong, sharp blow. "Unbelievable," he whispered. It wasn't unbelievable that she was pregnant. It was unbelievable that the world, with all its cruelty, with all its iron and guns and hate, had failed to stop this. It had failed to kill their love. Clara covered his hands with hers. "Not shame," she whispered. "Life, life," Nietzsche repeated. "The story ends here, on an evening in early autumn. The wind is picking up, rustling the tops of the ponderosa pines, carrying the promise of another winter. The sun is setting, casting long, purple shadows across the valley. Clara and Nietzsche sit in the doorway of the cabin, wrapped in the old buffalo robe that has sheltered them through so many nights. The baby has not come yet, but soon. They watch the smoke rise from the Jeffersons' chimney. They hear the bleating of the Morales sheep. They are not safe, not truly. The world outside the ridges still hates them. If they walk into town, they are still the whore and the savage. The army is still patrolling the plains. Harlan's ghost still whispers in the dark. They have no money. They have no legal claim to this land. They live on the edge of the blade. But as Nietzsche pulls the blanket tighter around Clara's shoulders, and she leans her head back against his chest, watching the first star appear in the darkening sky, none of that matters. They have carved a space out of the nothingness. They have built a home out of the wreckage of their pasts. Clara closes her eyes. She feels the warmth of the man she chose. She feels the weight of the child she carries. She feels the scars on her legs, cool in the evening air. She is not unbroken, but she is standing, and for tonight, that is enough. Thank you for listening to this story of Clara and Nietzsche. It has been a journey through the dust and blood of the old frontier to find a place where love could grow in the cracks of the stone. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you watching the sunset in Arizona? Or perhaps listening to the rain in London? Please leave a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on the story. Did Clara and Nietzsche's ending feel earned to you? If you enjoyed this tale of survival and romance, please consider subscribing to the channel From Wild West for more stories from the American frontier. Until next time, keep your fires burning and your powder dry.